Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Karen Bell, and Heather Boetto and I are both Associate Professors of Social Work within the School of Social Work and Arts at Charles Sturt University. And we'd like to thank the organisers of today's symposium for the opportunity to learn from others and also to tell you a little bit about one of our disaster resilience projects entitled Strengthening Disaster Resilience in Community Service Organisations. And Heather and I will be co-presenting by alternating slides, so I'll now pass you on to Heather.
Thanks, Karen. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to meet you online. And I just wanted to mention that we did prepare a little summary for our presentation today, but we're not going to read it out. We're just going to skip over this slide and have it there for safekeeping. Next slide, Karen.
Okay, so we'd also like to acknowledge, being based on the Wagga Wagga campus of CSU, we'd like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the custodians of the unceded lands on which our campus is placed and upon which the project took place as well. We pay respect to elders past, present and future and acknowledge the deep spiritual relationships of First Nations people with country. And as members of the CSU community, we acknowledge the Wiradjuri ethos of Yinjamarra Winghangana, which is the aim for us all to learn to the wisdom of living well in a land worth living in. Heather.
So this is an overview of our presentation today. We're going to provide some details about the project background, its aim, design and key findings before going into detail about a model of disaster preparedness that we developed as part of the research, and then we'll conclude with some recommendations.
Okay, so by way of background, a few years back now, Heather and I were in the process of writing some specialised disaster practice subjects for our social work students. And as part of that writing process, we became increasingly familiar with the literature as well as resources on offer and some gaps within the literature and the resources on offer. So, and in particular, we became interested in the work of the Australian Council of Social Services, ACOS, and we started to explore some ideas for potential projects around disaster practice for community workers in our local area. And then as our ideas took form, we knew it would be important to work in partnership with local disaster resilience and emergency response experts. And Heather had started building connections through her participation in a CSU Community Resilience Colloquium. And from this initial connection, we formed a local advisory group, and that was made up of experts from the Wagga City Council, the Red Cross, New South Wales Health, Resilience New South Wales as it was then, the Department of Family and Community Services and the SES. And we had some ongoing input as well from the New South Wales Police, regional emergency management officers, and also some ongoing initial input, at least from ACOS. And then through our discussions with the advisory group, it emerged that local community services were perceived as being keen to contribute, but often uncertain about how best to contribute during times of disaster, and that many were likely to be underprepared in terms of having strategies to manage service disruptions, in particular due to disaster. Heather.
So the project took place in the Regional Centre of Wagga Wagga, which I'm sure many of you are quite familiar with. We often see Wagga and Bathurst as being very close in terms of our where our campuses are located. So Wagga is located on Wiradjuri land alongside the Murrumbidgee River, and Wagga tends to operate as a service centre for many surrounding townships, which I think is fairly similar for Bathurst as well. And Wagga is also prone to flooding, heat waves, bushfires and storms.
Okay, so to address the issues that had been identified by the advisory group, Heather and I, with input from another social work colleague, Professor Wendy Bowles, designed the project. And the central aims of the project were to raise awareness of disaster preparedness and to strengthen disaster resilience in community service organisations. Heather.
So the project design was underpinned by participatory action research because we wanted to create new knowledge, but we also really wanted to try and create real outcomes within the community. So as Karen mentioned, we established an advisory group, and their expertise and support was absolutely integral to the project's success. They were involved in all aspects of the project, including the co-design of resources. And they also were committed to having direct contact with organisations to provide advice and support throughout the project. So we undertook a range of activities, including a workshop program, pre and post surveys, and individual interviews. And we also developed a free online short course, which Karen will tell you a little bit more about later on.
Okay, so I'll whiz through these key findings, and Heather will focus in quite some more detail around the cross-sectorial and interprofessional relationships findings. But in terms of the overall knowledge gained by participants in the project, we had feedback from participants around them gaining knowledge around the need for that holistic approach and in response to the multidimensional and often uneven impacts of disasters on community members. And they also gained knowledge about local emergency response networks. They made direct contacts with local emergency network experts and resilience experts. And they expressed appreciation for a deeper understanding of the importance of localised planning. And there were also some interesting findings around direct practice with clients, in particular around the need to embed disaster practice into everyday practice with their clients. And this reinforced the notion of aiming for service continuity whenever possible when there are service disruptions, because there was an increased understanding and appreciation that during those times, there's heightened need for the support that they normally give to their clients. So it's really important to be able to try to maintain service continuity. And some practical examples of that emerged as well from participants, including changes to their intake and assessment protocols in some instances. And some agencies had undertaken detailed mapping of their clients to see where physically located clients were in terms of locational disadvantage. Maybe access roads were an issue for some pockets of their clientele, or communication network limitations and so forth. And in terms of diversity of experience, participants shared with us and between themselves a lot of knowledge about the diversity of community members' experiences, and just some really quick examples around women and children, for example, escaping domestic violence had all sorts of additional layers of complexity during times of disaster, as did people living with a whole range of disabilities, people experiencing homelessness, and perhaps people with culturally and linguistically diverse needs as well. And the project also offered all of us the opportunity to learn from a local Wiradjuri elder and a First Nations environmental scientist, and they generously shared their knowledge around holistic approaches to resilience and caring for country as well. And really quickly, so that Heather can focus on the cross-sectorial relationships, in relation to organisational barriers and challenges, I think the really strong message we got from participants was around resource paucity and how stretched these organisations already are. And that the COVID pandemic had really added several layers to that resource paucity and the fatigue as well. So we'll move on to cross-sectorial and interprofessional relationships findings, Heather.
Thanks, Karen. Look, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but just to say that we wanted to emphasise one of the outcomes relating to cross-sectorial relationships. So in the context of the project, it was between community service organisations and emergency services. And this is a statement made by one project participant who said, to have our emergency services sit in a room and talk to you and share their experiences, and suddenly the light bulb goes off and you ask, how would this work? And for them to kind of reaffirm what you're doing, is you're on track, or think about this topic, has been a valuable experience. It's been a valuable thing having them there.
So in terms of tangible outputs from the project, we'll talk about a model of disaster preparedness that emerged from our findings in a little bit more detail in a second. There was a workshop program, and that's mapped out. It's adaptable to other contexts and other needs and timeframes, etc. And it focuses on practical outcomes and that diverse engagement with community members and making those cross-sectorial connections. And Heather's mentioned the online free short course, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about that as well in a minute. And participants also received service user preparedness kits, so personal sort of household level preparedness kits, as well as an organisational preparedness kit. And they're sort of template kits, if you like. And again, they're adaptable to all sorts of particular contexts and maybe particular needs as well. And they included a range of really practical items that might just make that immediate crisis more manageable. Over to you, Heather.
So this is a model of disaster preparedness that we developed, which is tailored to meet the specific needs of community service organisations. It looks a bit like a donut. In the context of this symposium, though, we sort of hoped that maybe these elements might be transferable across sectors as well. So, for example, some of these elements that we're about to talk about might be relevant to the business sector. So the model was derived from the data and involved input from both community service organisations as well as disaster specialists involved in the research. And you can see that the model presents as an acronym, which we call the ULTRAS model. And it's designed essentially to equip community service organisations with the capacity to continue service provision and to manage service disruption during and following disaster events. And we're going to work through each very quickly, because we've been given our time warning, each acronym of the model.
Okay, so starting with you, this involves understanding the role of the organisation, so your organisation's role. Excuse me. So we argue and our participants reinforce that community service organisations actually offer really unique information, as they're often conduits between facilitators and they're facilitators of communication between service networks and those often underrepresented community members. And we hope that with increasing visibility of this really important role of community service organisations, that again, there'll be that movement from a shutdown mentality to service continuity within organisations, but also that in terms of broader disaster planning within communities, that this unique role that community service organisations can play really becomes more visible and embedded within community disaster planning efforts. Heather.
Thanks, Karen. So the next element is local community context. And while it might sound a little obvious, to need to know your local community context, it does take some investment of time. And given how focused I think we tend to become on, our organisational or business objectives, it can easily be forgotten, particularly when, well, at least we find in the community services sector that organisations really do regularly face mini crises on a daily basis. So this element is about knowing your community's characteristics, including geographical and topographical features, as well as demographical characteristics that could help mitigate service disruption during and following a disaster situation. I was going to go into detail about some examples of what this might mean, but because of our time constraints, I might not go into as much detail. But just by way of example, if an organisation is located by a river or near dense woodlands, then obviously that organisation is going to be, maybe susceptible to floods or fire. So those sorts of things need to be considered. And just to quickly mention the importance of engaging with local First Nations communities, because First Nations people, have had direct experiences with disasters over an extended period of time, and therefore have accumulated knowledge about the experiences, the frequency, the predictability, intensity, and impacts of disaster events.
Okay, so super quickly, in terms of team preparedness, I just want to draw out some key points there. It's really important to have that holistic approach. A lot of our community service organisations consisted of ongoing staff as well as casual staff as well as volunteers. So we really tried to reinforce the importance of having that holistic approach and, again, having that focus on service continuity whenever possible. So that's probably all I've got time to say there, Heather. I'll let you move on.
Thanks. And this element is about relationship building, which I think is important for everyone, no matter what industry or sector that we're part of. So we found that building relationships between the human services sector and the emergency services sector is actually mutually beneficial because it enhanced understanding about local community processes, including roles and responsibilities of organisations and local policies and procedures.
And implementing policy and procedures, the I section. So again, it's really about engagement of all stakeholders, I guess, is one of the key messages from that segment of the model. And I know we're running very close to time, so I'll move on as well, Heather, to service user preparedness.
Thanks, Karen. So this is the last one, and this is about the importance of preparing service users or clients and, perhaps in the case of businesses, consumers. So in the case of community service organisations, they often engage with people experiencing poverty and disadvantage, which places organisations in a unique position to reduce the disproportionate impacts of disasters, by consideration of how to integrate disaster preparedness into their everyday work.
Okay, so onto the online short course. So this is something we're really excited about because it's an enduring outcome from the project that we didn't initially set in to do, but it emerged as a really sensible thing we thought to focus on, drawing on the findings of the project. So the online short course is free, it's self-paced, it's flexible, and it's aimed at community service organisations or any community organisation actually, and it's available through the CSU Open Learning platform. And we co-designed a lot of the input with our advisory group of experts at various stages as well. The course was actually launched last week, and with our busy community service organisation audience in mind, we centralised engagement, knowledge sharing, accessibility and flexibility and practicality as core design principles. And while it's been designed as a standalone course at the moment, it could be a platform for further development down the track. It's centred around the ULTRAS model, as you might be able to see there on the screen. And I don't think we've got time for the video, Heather, so we might just skip unless you think there's time.
Oh, no. I thought we were going to have a luxurious amount of time to give you a quick peek at, one of our resources that are in the short course, but we'll skip over that and keep going, Karen.
And I think maybe the important point there is to say a lot of the participants from the project generously gave their time to record videos from their practice experience as short segments within the course materials. So it really is lively, let's hope, for the people that engage with the course. So just, again, a really quick summary of key recommendations. So the key points there are around increased recognition of community service organisations and that unique knowledge that they bring to the table with regard to disaster resilience. And the greater visibility of that resource that we've got and a greater visibility of disaster preparedness practice within community service professions as well. So really embedding that and transforming practice to embed preparedness practice. And reiterating the point around sustainable cross-sectorial relationships and the criticality of that for effective disaster planning and resilience building processes. Heather.
Thanks, Karen. We also just wanted to quickly acknowledge our advisory group members on this slide, as well as the project's funding body, which was the New South Wales Disaster Resilience Program.